Imagine holding on to an anchor while sinking deeper into dark water. The weight pulls you lower with every second, yet your hands refuse to let go. You know you will drown. You know release could save you, yet a quiet voice insists that everything you have endured to get here cannot be abandoned now. That is the voice of the sunk cost fallacy, a whisper that does not feel like madness, but feels like loyalty, commitment, even love. It is a voice you may have followed in more ways than you realize. In the silent corridors of our minds, this fallacy hides behind what seems rational. We stay in relationships that no longer nurture us, telling ourselves that the years invested must mean something. We remain in jobs that corrode our well-being, convinced that walking away would betray the sacrifices we have already made. These are not isolated errors. They are a pattern of human behavior so common that psychologists have given it a name: the sunk cost fallacy. It belongs to the darker side of our decision-making, the part of our psychology that fears loss so deeply it would rather endure suffering than admit a mistake. The most unsettling truth is that this bias feels protective. You may think staying is noble, proof of resilience and loyalty, yet beneath that belief lies something far less admirable: fear of wasted effort, fear of admitting defeat, fear of starting over. These fears wrap themselves in morality, making you feel honorable for clinging to the familiar, even when the familiar is toxic. This is where dark psychology enters quietly, exploiting your instincts not to protect you, but to trap you. It twists your values into chains. Ask yourself, how many times have you continued down a path because you already came too far to turn back? Perhaps you studied a subject you hated because you already spent years in school. Perhaps you endured mistreatment from someone close because you had already endured so much pain before. Perhaps you stayed silent in an office where your worth was ignored because you could not face losing the time already spent building a reputation. These are not isolated moments. They are evidence of how deeply the sunk cost fallacy rules human life. Dark psychology studies these exact vulnerabilities, the ways in which our own minds betray us. It examines why we protect the past, even at the expense of the future. The sunk cost fallacy thrives because your brain is wired to avoid losses more strongly than it seeks rewards. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, pioneers of behavioral economics, prove that losing feels twice as painful as winning feels good. This imbalance leads you to irrational choices, clinging to what hurts, unable to step away. This is not only personal. Entire societies, governments, and corporations fall victim to the same illusion. Wars continue long after they should end. Projects consume billions long after failure is certain. Relationships drag on for decades in silent misery. It is not stupidity, it is human psychology. The darker question is why we mistake endurance for virtue, why we idolize perseverance even when it destroys us. The most chilling truth is that we rarely notice when we are caught. When you tell yourself you cannot quit because you already spent too much time, too much money, too much of yourself, you are speaking in the language of this fallacy. You are negotiating with the past rather than choosing for the future. The more you sacrifice, the heavier the anchor becomes, until you forget that you can let go at all. In the quiet moments when you reflect on the choices you regret, do you realize how much was lost, not because of the wrong path, but because of the refusal to leave it? That is the shadow we are about to explore. The grip of the sunk cost fallacy is stronger than most people ever admit, and its roots are deeper than simple fear. Understanding why we hold on will expose something uncomfortable about human nature itself. This is where we begin. The anchor is already in your hands. The question is not whether you will let go, but whether you will see that you are drowning before it is too late. For most of your life, you have been told that perseverance is a virtue. Parents tell children to never give up. Teachers praise commitment. Society rewards those who endure through hardship and labels them resilient. It becomes ingrained so deeply that when you face pain or dissatisfaction, your first instinct is to stay, to fight, to finish what you started. On the surface, this belief seems harmless. even noble. But behind that belief hides one of the most deceptive traps in human psychology, the sunk cost fallacy. The lie is subtle. It convinces you that the more you have invested, the more you must continue, even when the outcome no longer serves you. People stay in careers they despise because they have already spent years climbing the ladder. Couples remain together despite mutual misery because they cannot accept the idea that those years would be meaningless if they walked away. The fallacy whispers that abandoning a path makes the past pointless, that ending a relationship erases the love that once existed, that leaving a job dishonors the sacrifices made to reach it. This is how dark psychology manipulates not only individuals, but entire cultures. It transforms what should be a simple decision about the present into a moral struggle about the past. You do not ask, does this serve me now? Instead, you ask, would leaving make everything I did before worthless? That single shift in perspective binds you to choices that harm you. It tricks you into treating pain as proof of commitment and convinces you that staying longer somehow redeems the suffering already endured. Consider how this belief shapes the modern workplace. Employees pour endless hours into roles that deplete their health and personal lives. They remain, not because the job offers fulfillment, but because walking away would mean admitting that the years of sacrifice cannot be reclaimed. Promotions, benefits, or future recognition become distant promises used to justify the present misery. The truth is rarely about loyalty to the company. It is about loyalty to the effort already given. The sunk cost fallacy feeds on this loyalty, turning it into a prison. The same pattern emerges in relationships. People hold on to love long after affection has turned cold. They stay because they cannot bear the thought of wasted years, shared memories, or the judgment of others who saw them invest everything. They hope, sometimes quietly, that enduring the pain will somehow restore the happiness they once knew. In reality, the fallacy locks them in place, using the weight of their own memories against them. This false belief persists because human beings crave meaning. We want to believe our suffering matters. We fear admitting that time, energy, and love could vanish without reward. This craving blinds us to a harsh reality. The value of an investment does not increase simply because we continue to add more to it. Yet the human mind rebels against this truth. It prefers the comforting lie that staying is always stronger than leaving, that holding on is always better than letting go. The dark psychology behind this is not merely personal. It is societal conditioning, reinforced by stories of heroic endurance, myths of soldiers who never retreat, lovers who never part, and workers who sacrifice everything for success. Feed the narrative that quitting is shameful. What these stories rarely show is the quiet devastation of those who stayed too long. No one celebrates the years wasted in the wrong fight, the wrong love, or the wrong life. Yet countless people carry that silent grief every day. If you examine your own life closely, you may find moments where this belief guided your choices, times when you convinced yourself to continue, not because the future promised joy, but because the past demanded justification. It is uncomfortable to admit how often this has happened. It forces you to question the foundation of decisions you once considered unshakable. That discomfort is exactly why this fallacy endures. The more we fear confronting the truth, the deeper we sink into the illusion. In the quiet recesses of your thoughts, ask yourself why you cling so tightly to things that hurt you. It may not be love. It may not be hope. It may simply be fear of loss disguised as virtue. This is the first dark truth we must face if we are to understand the power of the sunk cost fallacy and the hold it has on every human being. The sunk cost fallacy begins with a single principle that seems obvious: what you have already paid, whether in time, effort, or emotion, should influence what you do next. At first glance, it feels reasonable. If you have worked for years in one career, it makes sense to keep going. If you have loved someone for a long time, it seems natural to fight for the relationship. But this reasoning is deceptive. The very definition of a sunk cost is that it cannot be recovered. Rationally, it should play no role in the decisions you make today, and yet it does, more than almost any other factor in human psychology. This fallacy manifests in daily life so subtly that you rarely recognize it. You buy a ticket to a concert, and when the day arrives, you are exhausted and do not want to go. But you force yourself anyway, telling yourself you cannot waste the money. That money is already gone, yet your mind treats attending the concert as a way to justify the expense. The same process occurs on a larger scale when you stay in a harmful job or relationship. The years you have already spent become a chain, convincing you that leaving now would mean those sacrifices were meaningless. Dark psychology exposes how this bias exploits human emotions. We fear regret more than we seek happiness. We fear admitting that we were wrong more than we desire being right now. This fear turns the past into a weapon against our own well-being. Once we invest deeply in something, our identity begins to intertwine with it. Walking away feels less like abandoning an external choice and more like betraying ourselves. This is why people continue to endure suffering even when escape is possible. The fallacy's strength also lies in how society interprets endurance. We glorify those who never quit, who persevere despite hardship. Movies and stories praise the hero who holds on, rarely showing the quiet tragedies of those who stayed in the wrong fight. This cultural narrative reinforces the bias, making quitting feel shameful and staying feel virtuous. It blinds us to a harsh reality. Not all battles are worth fighting, and not all commitments deserve our loyalty. Psychological research confirms the universality of this phenomenon. In 1985, researchers Hal Arkus and Catherine Bloomer demonstrated that people are more likely to continue with a failing project if they have already invested heavily in it, compared to those with no prior investment. Their experiments showed a consistent pattern. Past investments distort future decisions, even when logic demands a different choice. These findings echo across fields from finance to military strategy to personal relationships. Entire organizations and governments fall victim to the same irrational pull, prolonging wars, projects, and policies long after failure is clear. The key to understanding the sunk cost fallacy is recognizing that the mind is not naturally rational. Evolution did not design human brains to evaluate decisions objectively. It designed them to survive, to avoid loss, to minimize pain. In ancestral environments, clinging to the familiar often meant safety. That instinct remains, even when modern life requires us to walk away. What once protected us now traps us. The first step toward freedom is awareness. You cannot escape what you cannot see, yet awareness alone is rarely enough. The emotions tied to past sacrifices are powerful, and logic alone struggles to overcome them. When you reflect on your own choices, consider how often you have justified staying, not because the future was promising, but because the past felt too heavy to abandon. When you begin to examine the mechanics of this fallacy closely, you realize it is not only about money or tangible investment. The most dangerous costs are emotional. You might tell yourself that you cannot leave a partner because of the memories you share, or because of the promises you once made. Those memories become a kind of currency in your mind, even though they cannot be recovered or spent. The emotional cost feels real, so you cling to the relationship even when it erodes your sense of self. Dark psychology reveals that this behavior is reinforced by cognitive dissonance. When your actions conflict with your beliefs, the mind works to reduce the discomfort. If you have invested years in something harmful, you unconsciously rewrite the story to justify staying. You convince yourself it is not so bad, that things might change, that walking away would make you the villain. Over time, the justification becomes stronger than the reality. You are no longer staying because the situation is good. You are staying because leaving would force you to admit the truth. This pattern shows up in toxic workplaces as well. You sacrifice personal time, mental health, and even physical well-being for a job that offers little reward. Each sacrifice makes leaving harder, not easier, because you tell yourself that quitting would erase everything you gave. The longer you stay, the more deeply you rationalize your choice, and the cycle feeds itself. The cost is not only financial or professional, it is the quiet erosion of purpose and identity. a slow surrender that most people do not see until decades have passed. One of the darkest aspects of the sunk cost fallacy is how it thrives in silence. People rarely speak about it openly. They hide the discomfort, smile through the pain, and hope their endurance will one day be vindicated. Yet the longer they wait, the more they lose. The future narrows, options fade, and the weight of the past grows heavier. This is why understanding the fallacy is critical. It is not simply a psychological curiosity, it is a survival skill. Research in behavioral economics consistently shows that humans overvalue what they already own or have done. This is known as the endowment effect, closely linked to the sunk cost fallacy. The mind assigns greater value to things once they belong to us, even when objective evidence suggests otherwise. It explains why people fight to keep failing investments or broken relationships alive long after they should have ended. They are not defending reality, they are defending identity. If you look around your own life, you may notice subtle forms of this bias everywhere. The drawer filled with unused items you refuse to throw away because they were expensive. The commitment to routines that no longer serve you but feel impossible to abandon. The friendships maintained out of habit rather than care. All are symptoms of the same psychological trap, a refusal to release the past even when it weighs you down. The deeper question is not only why we fall for this trap, but why we resist acknowledging it. The answer lies in pride, fear, and the human desire to believe our suffering has purpose. The moment you admit that a sacrifice was wasted, you confront the terrifying thought that pain might have been for nothing. To protect ourselves from that thought, we cling to the illusion that more sacrifice will redeem what is already lost. This is the quiet cruelty of the sunk cost fallacy. It does not just trap you in bad jobs or relationships. It convinces you that staying is righteous, that holding on proves strength, that quitting equals failure. In truth, sometimes the bravest act is to walk away. The sunk cost fallacy is not just a quirk of human thinking. It is rooted deeply in the structure of the brain, in the circuits that evolved long before modern society existed. To understand why you struggle to let go, you must understand what your brain is doing beneath awareness. It is not a simple matter of logic. It is a struggle between neural systems designed for survival, memory, and emotion. At the core of this struggle is the way the brain processes reward and loss. The human brain is biased toward avoiding pain rather than seeking pleasure. Loss aversion, as proven in countless behavioral studies, shows that losing something feels twice as powerful as gaining something of equal value. This is why you feel the sting of failure longer than the joy of success. When applied to relationships or careers, this bias pushes you to avoid the emotional pain of admitting defeat, even if continuing causes greater harm over time. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational decision-making, competes with the limbic system, which governs emotions and survival instincts. In situations involving sunk costs, the emotional centers often win. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure in the brain, lights up when you anticipate loss. It sends signals that amplify fear and stress, pushing you to cling to what you already have. This reaction is not logical, it is primal, a remnant of an ancient world where losing resources could mean death. Another part of the brain, the striatum, plays a role in how you anticipate reward. When you have invested in something for a long time, dopamine patterns form around the expectation of eventual payoff. This makes abandoning the investment feel like abandoning the reward itself. Even when evidence shows that the reward will never come, your brain struggles to let go of the pattern. It is why gamblers keep playing after losing, and why people stay in failing careers hoping for a promotion that may never arrive. Memory also traps you. The hippocampus stores emotional memories linked to past investments. These memories are not neutral records. They are colored by meaning and significance, intensifying attachment to whatever you sacrificed for. When you recall the late nights, the emotional battles, the moments you fought to hold on, those memories do not simply inform you, they pressure you to keep going. whispering that walking away would make all that suffering pointless. Dark psychology highlights how these mechanisms are not only natural, but exploitable. Marketers, corporations, even toxic individuals use this bias against you. They frame losses in ways that make quitting feel unbearable. They remind you of what you have already given, using your own memory and fear to keep you committed. The manipulation is subtle. They do not need to force you to stay. They only need to remind you of what you have already sacrificed. This neural tug-of-war explains why awareness alone rarely frees you from the fallacy. Even when you know logically that past costs should not affect your choices, the emotional weight anchored in your brain pulls you back. Your nervous system reacts as though letting go is dangerous, even when it is the safest path forward. Understanding this internal conflict is the first step toward reclaiming control. Without it, you remain vulnerable to the quiet trap set by your own mind. The deeper you explore the neural mechanics behind the sunk cost fallacy, the more unsettling the picture becomes. It is not only that the brain resists letting go, it actively rewrites reality to justify holding on. This process is driven by cognitive dissonance, which arises when your actions and beliefs collide. If you have already poured years of effort into a failing relationship or career, acknowledging the truth would mean admitting you misjudged the path from the very beginning. That admission triggers intense discomfort in the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region responsible for detecting conflict. To protect you from that discomfort, the brain manufactures rationalization. It convinces you that the pain is temporary, that change is possible, that leaving would be premature. The dopamine system adds another layer to this trap. When you commit to something over time, dopamine does not simply respond to rewards. It responds to the anticipation of them. Each additional investment heightens the expectation that a payoff is coming, even if reality suggests otherwise. This creates what neuroscientists call a reward prediction error. Instead of cutting losses, the brain increases commitment, hoping to finally reach the imagined reward. This mechanism explains why people keep gambling after losing, keep working after burnout, and keep loving after betrayal. The brain clings to the hope that the next moment will redeem the past. Stress hormones such as cortisol deepen the entrapment. High stress states impair the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that would normally help you evaluate options objectively. Under stress, emotional impulses dominate, and the ability to weigh future consequences weakens. This is why someone in a toxic relationship might recognize the harm intellectually, yet feel paralyzed to leave. Their stress-primed brain is not designed for calm evaluation. It is designed for immediate survival, even if that survival instinct now works against them. Another critical factor is social memory. Humans evolved in tribes where belonging was tied to survival. Breaking from a group, abandoning a role, or rejecting an obligation could once mean isolation and death. This evolutionary imprint lingers. The brain treats leaving a relationship or career as a potential threat to social standing, even when the modern consequences are far less dire. The sunk cost fallacy taps into this primal fear, making freedom feel dangerous rather than liberating. Dark psychology exploits these biological realities. Manipulative individuals and institutions know, consciously or not, how to trigger these neural vulnerabilities. They remind you of your sacrifices, they praise your loyalty, they frame departure as betrayal. These messages activate emotional circuits that override rational thought, ensuring you stay committed even when staying causes harm. Understanding this exploitation is essential if you hope to break free. The lesson here is both sobering and empowering. You cannot simply tell yourself to think rationally and expect freedom. Your brain's wiring will resist. But by recognizing the specific mechanisms at play, the dopamine loops, the conflict detection, the fear of loss, you can begin to disrupt the cycle. Awareness allows you to pause, to question the automatic justifications, and to ask whether your choice is about the future you want or the past you cannot release. At its core, the sunk cost fallacy is not about numbers or logic. It is about identity and fear. It is about who you believe you are and what you believe your sacrifices must mean. Until you confront those beliefs at the level of the brain, the anchor will remain heavy in your hands. When the sunk cost fallacy takes root in relationships, it does not appear as numbers or calculations. It appears as memories, promises, and shared histories that feel impossible to abandon. The pain of leaving is amplified by the emotional investments already made. Every moment spent, every sacrifice endured, every plan for the future becomes a silent argument to stay. This is why so many people remain in relationships long after love has faded. It is not always because of hope or desire. It is because the weight of the past feels too heavy to set down. Dark psychology explains how these emotional investments are turned against you. The mind struggles to separate love from obligation. Once you have given pieces of yourself to another person, your sense of identity intertwines with theirs. Leaving no longer feels like ending a relationship. It feels like losing a part of yourself. This is why people describe breakups as feeling like death. The loss is not only of the partner, but of the version of themselves that existed within that bond. Attachment theory helps explain why the sunk cost fallacy strikes so powerfully in matters of love. Secure attachments allow people to form healthy bonds, and when necessary, let them go. Insecure attachments, however, make separation excruciating. Those with anxious attachment fear abandonment and cling tighter when faced with loss, believing that more investment will save the relationship. Those with avoidant attachment fear vulnerability, but remain trapped by guilt or social expectation. Both patterns reinforce the same error, staying because of the past rather than choosing for the present. The dynamics become even darker when manipulation enters the picture. Emotional blackmail is one of the most common tools in toxic relationships. A partner may remind you of everything they have done for you, making departure feel selfish or cruel. They may highlight the years you have shared or the sacrifices they claim to have made, framing your desire to leave as betrayal. This tactic exploits the sunk cost fallacy directly, transforming your loyalty into a weapon against your own happiness. Cultural narratives intensify the trap. Films, songs, and stories celebrate enduring love that overcomes every obstacle. We are told that walking away means giving up, that true love is proven by suffering through hardship. Rarely do these stories show the quiet devastation of staying in a relationship that erodes your well-being. The myth of unconditional devotion blinds us to the reality that some bonds should end for the sake of survival. In real life, this bias can manifest as subtle compromises that accumulate over time. You overlook small betrayals because of the good memories. You forgive harmful behavior because of the years already spent together. You rationalize unhappiness because you once promised forever. Over time, these compromises reshape your sense of what is acceptable. What begins as devotion quietly transforms into endurance, and endurance turns into entrapment. The most unsettling part is how normalized this cycle becomes. People stay not only because they fear loneliness, but because they cannot face the thought that their sacrifices were meaningless. They would rather suffer than admit the relationship has run its course. This is not love, it is the sunk cost fallacy, tightening its grip, convincing you that holding on is noble when, in truth, it is a form of self-betrayal. The psychological weight of staying in such relationships becomes heavier as the years pass. Each holiday spent together, every photograph on the wall, every shared milestone deepens the sense that leaving would undo the story you have built. The fallacy thrives here, feeding on nostalgia and the fear of starting over. It whispers that you cannot discard a history so carefully written, even if the present is marked by unhappiness. In reality, history cannot be erased. It lives in memory regardless of whether you remain or walk away. Yet the mind resists this truth, clinging to the illusion that staying somehow preserves meaning. Dark psychology explores how this resistance can be exploited, intentionally or unintentionally, by the people involved. A partner may not consciously plan to trap you, yet their fears and insecurities create dynamics that make leaving unthinkable. They may say, "After everything we have been through, you cannot just walk away," framing loyalty as a debt you owe rather than a choice you freely make. Over time, such sentiments transform mutual bonds into obligations that feel impossible to break. This psychological entanglement becomes more severe when abuse is present. In cycles of emotional or physical abuse, the sunk cost fallacy works alongside trauma bonding, a powerful attachment formed through alternating periods of fear and reward. Victims endure harm while clinging to moments of kindness, believing the relationship can return to the way it once was. The longer this cycle continues, the harder it becomes to separate love from harm. The person feels bound, not only by fear but by the belief that leaving would nullify the sacrifices they made to endure. Even in less extreme cases, social expectations reinforce the trap. Family pressure, cultural norms, and public perception all contribute to the fear of ending a relationship. People worry about judgment from relatives or friends, about admitting failure in a world that idolizes lasting partnerships. This social weight merges with the personal, making departure feel like both an internal and external defeat. Philosophically, the question arises, does suffering for love make it more meaningful? Many believe it does. They equate struggle with depth, endurance with authenticity. Yet this belief can lead people to remain in harmful situations far longer than they should. The truth is simpler and harder to accept. Love is not proven by suffering, it is proven by mutual respect, growth, and care. When these vanish, staying is no longer devotion, it is surrender to a psychological bias that mistakes sacrifice for virtue. Recognizing this bias in relationships requires immense courage. It means confronting the possibility that years were spent on something that no longer serves you. It means accepting that walking away does not erase the love that once existed, but honors the truth of the present. This realization is painful, but it is also liberating. By releasing the weight of sunk costs, you reclaim the ability to choose a future free of unnecessary suffering. The hardest part is not understanding this intellectually, it is acting on it emotionally. The heart resists what the mind already knows. The grip of the sunk cost fallacy is strongest where love and identity meet, and breaking that grip demands a reckoning few are prepared to face. The sunk cost fallacy does not only shape personal relationships, it infiltrates the professional world, dictating career choices and keeping people tied to jobs that no longer serve them. The modern workplace often romanticizes loyalty. Companies celebrate employees who remain for decades, framing their tenure as a sign of honor and dedication. In reality, this cultural narrative hides a darker truth. Many individuals stay not out of passion or fulfillment, but out of fear of wasting the time and effort they have already invested. Consider the countless workers who entered a profession with high hopes, believing it would lead to meaning or stability. Over time, the role may become toxic, unfulfilling, or even harmful to mental health. Yet when thoughts of leaving arise, a heavy internal voice pushes back. It whispers about the years already spent in training, the late nights endured, the sacrifices made to climb the ladder. This is the sunk cost fallacy at work, convincing people that leaving would make those years meaningless, even when staying causes further harm. Dark psychology examines how institutions exploit this bias. Many organizations are structured around incremental rewards that keep employees invested. Promotions, titles, and symbolic perks are dangled just far enough away to encourage continued sacrifice. When individuals feel they have already come too far to quit, they become easier to control. The cost is not only personal well-being, but also the ability to make rational decisions about the future. Behavioral economics provides evidence of this pattern. Research shows that people are more likely to continue pursuing a failing endeavor when they have invested significant resources, even when switching paths would be more beneficial. In the workplace, this translates into employees remaining in roles they have outgrown, simply because they cannot accept that their previous sacrifices will not be repaid. The fear of losing those investments outweighs the possibility of future growth elsewhere. The moral weight of loyalty further complicates this bias. People are praised for sticking with a company through challenges, even when the company does not reciprocate that loyalty. Quitting is often stigmatized, framed as a failure of character rather than a strategic choice. This perception pressures employees into silence, making them endure environments that drain them emotionally and physically. In extreme cases, individuals internalize this narrative so deeply that they equate their professional identity with suffering. The sunk cost fallacy thrives in this silence. Every extra year spent in a harmful job makes it harder to leave. The sacrifices made are reframed as evidence of devotion, rather than warning signs of entrapment. People convince themselves that one more year, one more project, one more promotion will make the suffering worthwhile. For many, that moment never comes. The professional world reinforces this cycle through subtle cultural expectations. Success is often measured by endurance rather than fulfillment. Colleagues admire those who have been at the same company for decades, rarely questioning whether that loyalty was freely chosen or born out of fear of change. When you see someone leave, whispers arise about their decision, framing it as impulsive or unwise. This quiet judgment keeps many people rooted in positions they outgrew long ago, afraid of the social cost of pursuing something different. Companies understand these psychological forces, even if only intuitively. Many design career paths that create the illusion of progress, while demanding relentless sacrifice. Each new milestone, such as a small raise or a title change, feels like validation for the sacrifices already made. Yet this validation is temporary, enough to keep you invested, but never enough to grant true satisfaction. The sunk cost fallacy thrives in this environment, convincing you that leaving would waste every prior achievement. Dark psychology exposes an uncomfortable truth about corporate culture. While organizations publicly praise innovation and forward thinking, they often rely on employees who remain too loyal for their own good. A person who questions their role, evaluates their well-being, and considers leaving is harder to control than one who feels morally obligated to stay. This is why narratives of family and loyalty are so common in workplace rhetoric. They transform personal sacrifice into virtue, making endurance appear admirable rather than exploitative. The psychological toll of this bias is significant. Over time, individuals begin to blur the line between personal identity and professional identity. They no longer ask whether the work fulfills them, but whether they have endured enough to deserve the reward they were promised. This mindset leads to burnout, resentment, and in many cases regret. When people finally leave after years of entrapment, they often grieve not only for the time lost, but for the opportunities they ignored while waiting for things to improve. Philosophically, this raises a difficult question. Do we owe loyalty to systems that fail to nurture us? Many feel they do, equating departure with betrayal. Yet loyalty without reciprocity is exploitation. A healthy commitment must be mutual. When a workplace offers only hollow promises in exchange for your sacrifices, clinging to the past does not honor your work, it diminishes it. Recognizing this requires a shift in perspective. It means evaluating choices based on the present and future rather than the weight of the past. It means acknowledging that leaving a job does not erase the skills, experience, or growth you gained. Those remain with you even if the company does not. Once you realize this, the illusion of wasted effort dissolves. The years were not wasted. What is wasted is the choice to stay when you already know it is time to go. The sunk cost fallacy blinds many to this truth. They wait for validation that never comes, convincing themselves that another year will justify the last 10. In reality, the door to freedom stands open, yet few step through it until exhaustion forces them to. This is the silent cost of misplaced loyalty, and it is one of the darkest psychological traps in the modern professional world. The sunk cost fallacy is often viewed as a psychological error, a cognitive bias rooted in emotion and memory. Yet when examined through a philosophical lens, it raises deeper questions about freedom, responsibility, and the meaning we assign to suffering. Human beings do not simply make decisions based on logic. We interpret those decisions through the stories we tell about ourselves. This is why the fallacy is so powerful. It is not merely about refusing to abandon a failing path. it is about protecting an identity that was built along that path. Existential philosophers such as Jean-Paul Sartre argued that human beings are condemned to freedom. Every choice we make defines who we are, and there is no escape from that responsibility. This freedom can feel unbearable, especially when confronting the possibility that years of our lives were spent on the wrong pursuit. The sunk cost fallacy emerges as a defense against that unbearable truth. By clinging to the past, we avoid facing the weight of freedom. We tell ourselves that we must continue because we have already begun, because turning back would dishonor the path behind us. In reality, this belief shields us from acknowledging that we are always free to choose differently, even if the cost of that choice is high. Friedrich Nietzsche examined suffering from a different angle, suggesting that humans endure hardship not because suffering itself is meaningful, but because we insist on giving it meaning. In toxic relationships and unfulfilling jobs, we often imagine that our sacrifices will eventually be justified. We convince ourselves that pain builds character, that endurance is a sign of strength. While this narrative can sometimes inspire resilience, it can also bind us to situations that destroy us. When suffering becomes the proof of worth, we risk glorifying endurance even when escape is possible. This philosophical conflict lies at the heart of the sunk cost fallacy. On one side is the desire for meaning, the belief that our past efforts must matter. On the other side is the reality of impermanence. The future is not bound to the past, and our sacrifices do not guarantee reward. Reconciling these truths is difficult. It forces us to question whether loyalty to the past should outweigh responsibility to the present self. Dark psychology deepens this conflict by showing how external forces manipulate these internal struggles. Cultural narratives glorify perseverance, telling stories of heroes who never quit and lovers who endure against all odds. These stories rarely question whether the fight was worth it. They rarely show the quiet devastation of those who stayed too long. In this way, philosophy and psychology intersect, exposing how myths of honor and sacrifice can lead individuals to accept suffering as destiny rather than challenge it. The tension between freedom and responsibility becomes most apparent when we consider the moral weight of leaving. Many people hesitate to abandon a failing path, not because they lack options, but because they fear what leaving implies about their character. They worry that walking away signals weakness, selfishness, or betrayal. This belief is rooted in a moral framework that equates endurance with virtue. In this framework, quitting feels like failing, not only others but also oneself. Philosophy challenges this assumption. If freedom is a fundamental human condition, then no past decision can bind the present self forever. Each moment offers the chance to choose again. The idea that we owe unlimited loyalty to our past choices is a form of self-enslavement. Sartre argued that authenticity requires embracing this freedom fully, even when it means dismantling the narratives we once built. Authenticity demands honesty about the present, even if it reveals that the past was misguided. The sunk cost fallacy thrives because it offers a comforting escape from this honesty. By telling ourselves that we must continue because of what we have already sacrificed, we avoid the discomfort of admitting we were wrong. This is why the fallacy is more than a cognitive error. It is an existential defense. It protects us from the unbearable thought that meaning is not guaranteed, that sacrifices do not automatically lead to reward. Nietzsche warned of this danger when he observed how easily humans impose false meaning onto suffering. When endurance becomes the measure of worth, pain itself is glorified. This belief can lead individuals to stay in harmful circumstances long after they should have walked away. There is also a social dimension to this struggle. Collective myths about honor and duty shape personal choices. Societies celebrate soldiers who fight to the end, workers who remain loyal for life, and lovers who never give up. These narratives serve cultural cohesion, but they also pressure individuals to ignore their own well-being. In this sense, the sunk cost fallacy is not merely personal, but cultural. It is woven into the very fabric of our moral ideals. Breaking free requires reframing what it means to be responsible. True responsibility is not blind loyalty to past commitments. It is the willingness to evaluate the present honestly and act in alignment with reality. This shift demands courage, because it often leads to unpopular choices. Friends, family, and colleagues may not understand why you walk away, yet choosing authenticity over appearance is the essence of personal freedom. In the end, the philosophical lesson is clear. The past may shape us, but it does not own us. Meaning is not found in endless endurance, but in the conscious choice to pursue what aligns with truth now. Recognizing this liberates us from the illusion that we must remain bound to suffering simply because we once chose it. It transforms responsibility from a burden into an opportunity, allowing us to step forward unchained from the weight of the past. Understanding the sunk cost fallacy is only the beginning. Recognizing how deeply it manipulates your emotions and thoughts does not automatically release you from its grip. Breaking free requires confronting both the psychology that binds you and the personal meaning you attach to your past sacrifices. It is not a single decision, but a process of rewiring how you evaluate choices, both present and future. The first step is awareness. You must learn to identify the subtle language of this fallacy in your own mind. Listen for thoughts like, "I cannot waste what I have already given," or "I have come too far to turn back now." These phrases may feel logical, even noble, but they reveal that your decision is being driven by the past rather than by what serves you now. Awareness does not remove the emotional weight, but it allows you to separate feelings from fact. Dark psychology reminds us that this bias thrives in silence and denial. The longer you avoid acknowledging that a relationship or job is harming you, the deeper the investment becomes, and the harder it is to leave. This is why reflection is essential. Take inventory of what the commitment is truly costing you in the present. Is the sacrifice still aligned with your values, or has it become a form of quiet self-destruction? This question, though uncomfortable, is the key to breaking the cycle. Emotional detachment is the next step. This does not mean becoming cold or unfeeling. It means learning to see your investment without letting it define you. The years you spent, the energy you poured in, the love you gave, these cannot be reclaimed, but they also do not bind your future. They exist as part of your story, not as a prison. Detachment allows you to honor what was while freeing you to choose differently moving forward. Practical strategies can help reinforce this mindset. Psychologists often recommend reframing decisions as if advising a friend. Ask yourself, if someone I loved were in this situation, what would I tell them to do? This perspective shifts the focus from emotional attachment to objective evaluation. Another method is cost-benefit projection. Imagine staying for another year and picture what that future realistically looks like. If the trajectory does not change, the weight of staying becomes clearer. Breaking free also requires confronting fear directly. Fear of regret, fear of judgment, fear of the unknown. These are the emotions that keep people clinging to harmful paths. Yet fear is not proof that staying is right. It is simply a sign that change is near. By naming the fear and acknowledging it, you weaken its hold. The fear will not vanish, but it will lose the power to control you. Breaking the cycle also involves reframing how you view the concept of loss. Most people focus only on what they might lose by leaving, but rarely consider what they continue to lose by staying. Time, energy, mental health, and opportunities slip away quietly while clinging to the past. Shifting this perspective allows you to see that the real loss may not come from walking away, but from refusing to do so. One effective psychological technique is known as future self-visualization. Picture yourself 5 years from now, still in the same situation, carrying the same weight, repeating the same justifications. Ask yourself honestly if that version of you is someone you want to become. This method forces the mind to confront the cost of inertia rather than only the fear of change. Support systems play a critical role as well. Breaking free from the sunk cost fallacy often requires the perspective of people who are not entangled in your emotional history. Trusted friends, therapists, or mentors can offer clarity when your own reasoning is clouded. They can remind you that your worth is not defined by how much you have endured, but by the choices you are willing to make for your own well-being now. Philosophically, reclaiming freedom from sunk costs requires a new relationship with responsibility. It is not about denying past commitments or ignoring the weight of promises once made. It is about acknowledging that every moment presents a fresh choice. True responsibility lies in aligning actions with current truth, rather than outdated obligation. This shift reframes quitting not as failure, but as an act of integrity toward the self you have become. Dark psychology warns that even as you gain awareness, the pull of sunk costs may resurface. Old memories will whisper that you have given too much to walk away. Regret will tempt you to continue sacrificing in hopes of redemption. These thoughts do not disappear overnight. They must be met repeatedly with calm recognition and a willingness to choose differently despite discomfort. Over time, this practice rewires the mind to prioritize the present over the past. Ultimately, breaking free is not about forgetting what you endured. It is about transforming that endurance into wisdom rather than allowing it to dictate your future. The past cannot be undone, but it also cannot claim ownership of what comes next unless you let it. Every step you take toward release affirms a deeper truth. You are not bound to continue suffering simply because you once chose a path. The journey through understanding the sunk cost fallacy reveals an unsettling truth. What we often perceive as loyalty or perseverance is, in many cases, a quiet surrender to fear. We stay in bad jobs and relationships not always because we love them, and not always because we believe they will change, but because we cannot bear to think our sacrifices were for nothing. The mind transforms past effort into chains, convincing us that freedom would mean betrayal of everything we have endured. Dark psychology uncovers how powerful this illusion is. The anchor we cling to is not real. It is constructed from memories, guilt, and the desperate need to justify pain. Each year spent, each tear shed, each hour invested adds weight to that anchor, until we cannot imagine ourselves without it. Yet if we examine closely, we see that the anchor is an illusion. The time we spent does not vanish if we let go. The love we gave does not disappear if we walk away. These experiences remain part of who we are, but they do not require us to remain bound to suffering. Freedom begins when we realize that meaning is not tied to endurance. A relationship does not become more valuable because we stayed through misery. A job does not become more meaningful because we endured years of unhappiness. What defines meaning is what it teaches us and how we choose to live afterward. The past informs us, but it does not own us. This realization is liberating, yet it can also feel terrifying, because it leaves no excuse for staying where we no longer belong. Philosophy reminds us that we are always free to choose again. Jean-Paul Sartre warned that this freedom is both a gift and a burden. It forces us to confront the reality that every moment is a new chance to define ourselves. We cannot hide behind the idea that the past obligates us to continue. Nietzsche's perspective adds another layer. Suffering does not automatically grant meaning. It is what we do with suffering that matters. We can either transform it into growth or remain imprisoned by it. When you look back on the paths you have taken, ask yourself what truly kept you there. Was it love, purpose, hope, or was it fear of admitting the truth? Often we discover that what felt like duty was simply habit, and what felt like loyalty was avoidance. This awareness is painful at first, but it is also the beginning of freedom. The anchor you have been holding is not what you think it is. It is not obligation. It is not honor. It is not love. It is memory, pretending to be destiny. Once you see it clearly, you can decide whether to keep carrying it or to set it down. Neither choice erases what you endured. It simply determines what you will endure next. If this truth unsettles you, let it. Sit with the discomfort, because discomfort often signals that change is possible. The moment you realize the anchor was never real is the moment you can finally rise toward the surface. And if you choose to rise, you will breathe again. If this spoke to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Comment what you are ready to let go of, not for me but for yourself. Subscribe if you wish to continue exploring the truths that most people avoid. The next time we meet, we will face another part of human nature that hides in the dark, waiting to be seen.